I never thought brewing my morning coffee would be the last normal thing I'd ever do. It was a peaceful Tuesday, the kind that starts with birdsong outside the window and a warm mug in hand. My kitchen smelled like cinnamon and roast, the way it always does when I use that old French press my daughter gave me years ago. I remember smiling at how ordinary everything felt. The breeze coming through the window, the hum of the refrigerator, the clock ticking lazily on the wall. But peace can be deceptive. Sometimes the veil between life and eternity is thinner than we think. One moment, I was stirring my cream into the coffee, and the next, a crushing pain exploded in my chest, like lightning had struck me from the inside. I clutched the counter, gasping. The mug slipped from my hands and shattered on the floor, but I barely heard it. I couldn't scream. I couldn't even cry. Somehow, I fumbled for the phone and dialed 911, but the world was already slipping away. My legs gave out. I collapsed, face down on the tile. Then everything went quiet. Not the kind of quiet you get at night when everyone's asleep. This was deeper. The silence of a world pausing. My ears heard nothing. My eyes saw nothing. And yet I was fully awake, aware, but no longer bound by flesh or breath. It was the strangest thing. My body had stopped, but I had not. I felt myself rise, lift, float. No pain, no fear, just weightlessness. The kind of freedom you don't even realize the soul longs for until the body lets go. I looked down and saw what I never thought I'd see. My lifeless form, crumpled on the floor, a tangle of limbs and grey hair. Paramedics burst into the room. I must have left the door unlocked that morning, and they rushed to my side. I could see them, hear their muffled voices like they were underwater. One of them shouted something and pressed paddles to my chest. My body jolted, but I didn't feel a thing. I wasn't in it anymore. That's when the light came. Not a beam, not a glow, but a presence. It didn't blind me. It embraced me. Warm, radiant, alive, and it wasn't coming from outside. It was drawing me from within, pulling me gently upward, like a tide carrying a leaf. I felt no resistance, no sorrow, just the strange sensation that I was finally going home, though I hadn't known I'd been away. The light seemed to breathe, if that makes any sense. And as I drifted toward it, I realized I was entering something, a tunnel, but not like a cave or passage. It was endless and yet intimate, expansive, but filled with presence. The walls shimmered with colors I don't have names for, hues that danced and pulsed with emotion, like they were alive. I was surrounded by music too, but it wasn't coming from instruments. It came from everywhere, and from me. The tones resonated through my very being, like my soul was finally tuned to the frequency of heaven. As I moved deeper into this tunnel, something unexpected began to happen. My life started to unfold before me, not in a blur, but in perfect, vibrant clarity. I wasn't just remembering, I was reliving. The moment I held my first child, the time I forgave someone who never apologized. Even the mornings I thought didn't matter, pouring cereal, folding laundry, waving to my neighbor across the fence. They all played before me like sacred tapestries, and each memory shimmered with meaning I'd never noticed while I lived them. Even my failures, my regrets. They were there too, not to shame me, but to show me how every moment, good or bad, was woven into something far greater. There was no condemnation, only understanding. It was as though love itself was guiding me through my own story, whispering, "This mattered. And so did this. And this." I had always feared death. I think we all do, in some way. But this wasn't death. This was awakening, and I was just beginning to see where it was leading me. As I moved further through the tunnel, the light didn't just grow brighter, it grew deeper. It wasn't just illumination. It was awareness. It was love. The kind of love that doesn't just look at you, but looks through you, sees all of you, and somehow embraces you more because of it. I felt layers of myself unravel, like veils being lifted from my soul. Every fear, every insecurity I had carried in life, they didn't just fade. They were absorbed by something greater, something eternal. The further I went, the less I clung to the questions that had once haunted me. Who am I? Was I enough? Did I matter? In that place, I didn't need answers. I already knew. And then I felt it, a presence, not just nearby, but ahead, waiting. Every fiber of my being recognized him before I even saw his face. Jesus. I didn't see him the way artists have painted him. This wasn't a man in robes with sandals and a crown of thorns. This was glory-made flesh, light that had a heart, a presence that could hold you without arms. His face was both radiant and familiar. I can't explain how, but I knew him. I always had. And yet, seeing him now, I realized I had barely scratched the surface of who he truly was. He looked at me, and in that gaze was everything I had ever longed for: acceptance, peace, truth. But not just a passive kind of love, the kind that nods politely and keeps its distance. No, this was an active love, a fierce love, the kind that reaches into your wounds and begins healing before you even ask. When he looked into my eyes, I knew he saw everything. Every thought I had ever had. Every selfish moment, every quiet act of kindness, every doubt, every prayer. And instead of shame, I felt grace. He didn't speak with lips, but I heard him just the same. You were made for more, Linda. What you are about to see isn't for you alone. It is for my children. You've been chosen to carry this message. My heart didn't feel fear. It felt purpose. I understood then that this journey wasn't just about me crossing into eternity. It was about being sent back, changed, to prepare others for what is coming. The light around us began to shift. Not fade, but transform. It was as though the brilliance of heaven made room for something even more vivid. I felt Jesus take me, not by hand, but by presence, and move me into another space, a realm within the realm. It was no longer just radiance and worship and peace. Now there was gravity, soberness. I could feel it in the air, or whatever it is you breathe when you're beyond breathing. This was still heaven, but it had become a place of revelation, and what I was about to witness, he made clear, was something that the world must know before it's too late. Then it began. The vision unfolded in layers. I saw Earth, not as it is now, but as it will be, chaotic, fragmented, shaken. Nations trembling from disasters, earthquakes, floods, fire, famine, people screaming for answers, for stability, for safety. The world didn't look like it had been conquered by war. It looked like it had been swallowed by confusion. Then I saw the answer being offered. At first it looked like salvation, a unified global system, sleek and seamless, powered by technology. No more paper money, no more banks, just digital access, instant transactions, and promises of equality and convenience. Governments merged into one unified voice, and people welcomed it with open arms. I saw lines of smiling faces, clapping, hugging, as they were told they would now be part of a system that would ensure their safety, their access, their worth. But then Jesus showed me what was behind it. Beneath the glittering promises and polished speeches, there was something else. A shadow. It moved through the system like a parasite, attaching itself to every transaction, every ID, every new innovation. This wasn't just technology, it was control. And it didn't just track people's spending, it tracked their beliefs, their thoughts, their loyalties. And then I understood. This wasn't just about money, it was spiritual. Every piece of the system pointed toward one thing: the mark. It didn't look like what I had expected. No barcodes, no tattoos, no obvious sign of the beast. It was presented as a requirement, just a chip, just a scan, just an update. But behind that mask was something ancient and dark. Jesus made it clear to me, accepting this mark would not be an accident. It would be a conscious decision. Maybe one made under pressure, maybe out of fear. But it would still be a choice, and that choice would echo in eternity. What horrified me most wasn't the force, it was the seduction. The way people ran toward the system, thinking it would save them. The way even churches began to preach compliance, calling it wisdom or compassion. This will help us help others, they'd say. God wouldn't want us to suffer, they'd argue. But in their desire for peace, they surrendered truth. Jesus' face grew somber as he revealed how many of his own people would be caught unprepared, spiritually asleep, their discernment dulled by comfort and distraction. The vision kept unfolding, each scene more urgent than the last. I wanted to look away. I couldn't. Jesus said, "They need to see this, Linda. Tell them what you've seen." And I knew, even as my soul trembled, that I had to remember every detail. For you. For those who still have time. The scenes shifted again, and now I saw what the world would become once this system was fully in place. It didn't happen all at once. No grand announcement, no visible tyrant with armies marching down the streets. It crept in like fog, slow, quiet, almost comforting. People didn't even realize they were being caged because the bars looked like blessings. Every aspect of life was digitized and centralized. Cash disappeared. Paper receipts and physical IDs became things of the past. People used retinal scans, fingerprints, or implanted chips to access everything. Bank accounts, groceries, transportation, even their own homes. The new system was efficient, clean, and eerily flawless. On the surface, it seemed like the future had arrived. But Jesus showed me that this was not progress. It was preparation. The infrastructure was being built for something far more sinister, and people accepted it. They embraced it. They celebrated the new ease of life, unaware of the trade they were making. A trade of freedom for comfort, of soul for control. The system didn't just know where you went or what you bought. It began to judge you, your beliefs, your conversations, your online activity. Every interaction became data. That data turned into a score, a measure of your trustworthiness. And that score determined everything. If you were approved, you could live a normal life. If not, doors began to close. First slowly, then all at once. You couldn't travel. You couldn't get medical care. You couldn't enroll your children in school or even enter certain stores. Society turned compliance into currency, and those who questioned it were left starving outside the gates. What struck me was how reasonable it all looked on the surface. The language used to roll out these changes was comforting. Words like unity, security, fairness, and public good. People were told that the world was too dangerous, too unstable, and that this system would protect them. And for a while, it did. Crime went down. Lines at hospitals and banks disappeared. Poverty declined. But Jesus let me feel the weight beneath the illusion. This was the serpent in the garden offering something that looked like wisdom, tasted like control, but brought only death. And what made it so dangerous was its subtlety. There was no evil face on the billboard, no red flags waving in the wind. It was hidden behind technology, behind policies, behind smiling faces of trusted leaders. Jesus showed me that the mark wasn't just a symbol or a chip or a tattoo. It was a surrender, a final alignment. It was saying yes to the beast's kingdom, spiritually, emotionally, economically. And once that yes was spoken, even in ignorance, it carried eternal consequences. That choice would define the soul. Not because God didn't want to forgive, but because people would harden themselves against him in their willingness to survive without him. I saw pastors, good men and women, stand behind pulpits and tell their congregations, "It's just a tool. Don't be afraid of technology. Don't let conspiracy rob you of compassion." I saw Christians trying to walk the line, trying to serve two masters, trying to blend in for the sake of their jobs, their families, their futures. And I saw how many of them fell. Not because they were evil, but because they didn't recognize the cost of compromise until it was too late. Jesus' sorrow in that moment pierced me. Not anger, sorrow. His heart broke for his children who would be deceived, not by violence, but by comfort. He said, "Linda, they will not be forced. They will choose. And many will choose wrongly because they haven't been taught to hear my voice." I felt the urgency of those words ripple through me. The mark would not be imposed by brute force. It would be chosen, sold as a solution, embraced as peace. And yet, it would cost people their souls. I saw entire families torn apart, parents pleading with children, husbands arguing with wives. Some chose faith and were cut off. Others gave in, saying, "God will understand," as they lined up to take the mark. The division was sharp and painful, and it wasn't just about beliefs, it was about survival. Because once the system was in place, those without the mark were cut off completely. No food, no housing, no medicine, no access. They were labeled as threats to progress, enemies of peace, even terrorists. Their pictures were broadcasted. Neighbors were encouraged to report them. They were hunted not with weapons, but with silence, exclusion, and societal scorn. But Jesus showed me something even more terrifying. Many people who took the mark didn't even believe in the Antichrist. They didn't think of themselves as evil. They just wanted to feed their children. They just wanted to keep their homes. And in their desperation, they silenced the still, small voice inside them. That's what made it so tragic. This wasn't a choice made in some dramatic, apocalyptic moment. It was made in grocery store lines, in doctors' offices, at job interviews, quiet, incremental moments where people said yes because they were afraid to say no. And Jesus showed me, fear, not rebellion, would be the biggest weapon of the enemy. He said to me, "My children must not only be ready physically, but spiritually. They must know me so well that when the lie comes wearing the face of truth, they can see through it. They must be anchored in my word, not in the world's systems." And I realized then how fragile our faith can be if it's not rooted in the eternal. The conveniences of the modern age are not evil by themselves, but they are leading us to a moment of choice. And those who don't see it coming will fall, not because they weren't warned, but because they weren't watching. As the vision continued, I saw crowds celebrating the mark, wearing it proudly like a badge of unity. They mocked those who refused, calling them backwards, hateful, judgmental. But I also saw believers, quiet, determined, unshaken. They stood apart, their eyes filled not with fear, but with clarity. And Jesus said, "These are my remnant. They have chosen me, even when it costs them everything, and I will never leave them." His words were fire and comfort all at once. because I understood then that the days ahead will not just test our strength, they will test our allegiance. And our allegiance must be to Him alone. The next thing I saw pierced me in a way I wasn't prepared for. The vision turned to those who refused the mark. These were not criminals or rebels. They weren't loud or violent. Many were soft-spoken, humble people, parents, grandparents, children. Their only offense was their refusal to participate in what they knew, deep in their spirits, was wrong. And for that, they were rejected. Not just by governments or corporations, but by their own communities, their own families. Some were dragged from their homes. Others were locked out of their accounts, denied healthcare, evicted, erased. Not because they'd broken a law, but because they wouldn't bow to the system. I saw a mother with 3 young children. Her eyes were sunken, her clothes torn, but her spirit radiated strength. She was trying to find food, turned away at every place she went. Her children didn't understand why they couldn't eat. She knelt beside them and whispered a prayer, tears rolling down her cheeks, not because she lacked faith, but because she carried the heartbreak of watching her babies suffer. And still, she would not take the mark. I saw men who had once held positions of respect, teachers, pastors, community leaders, now hiding, living in the shadows, called extremists and enemies of peace. Their crime? Holding on to the truth, refusing to bend. And yet, amidst the despair, there was a strange and powerful beauty. These people, persecuted and pushed to the margins, had a peace that couldn't be faked. They had a strength that didn't come from within themselves, but from something, or rather, someone, greater. Jesus showed me their hearts, and they burned with unwavering light. While the world chased comfort, they held on to conviction. While others bowed to survive, they stood to honor the one who had already conquered death. I saw secret gatherings, little pockets of believers coming together in basements, forests, even caves. They didn't have stages or screens or choirs. They didn't have heat or light or food to offer. But they had something the world couldn't touch: faith. Pure, stripped down, desperate faith. They sang softly, voices trembling, not in fear, but in reverence. They broke bread, not for tradition, but because it reminded them they were one body, still united, still alive, still His. These were not grand revivals. These were lifelines, sacred moments where heaven touched earth in the hidden places of the persecuted. But I also saw how hard it was. I felt their hunger, their fatigue, their aching loneliness. Some wondered if they could go on. Some questioned why God allowed this to happen. But each time one of them was on the edge of breaking, I saw Jesus standing near. Sometimes He would whisper a word of encouragement. Sometimes it was just His presence, invisible to the world, but unmistakable to the spirit. They drew strength from Him, strength no system could counterfeit. And it was then I understood something that shook me to my core. Suffering did not weaken their faith. It refined it. Jesus said to me, "These are my warriors. Their victory is not seen by the world, but it is known in heaven. They overcome not by force, but by fidelity, and I am with them, every step, every breath, every tear." I watched as some of these believers reached others. Quietly, lovingly, they shared what little they had: a piece of bread, a whispered prayer, a word of hope, and the light spread, not fast, not flashy, but steadily. It moved from heart to heart, like embers in a fire the enemy couldn't extinguish. Then the vision shifted again, and I saw him. The man who would lead the world into deception, the Antichrist. He did not come with threats and weapons. He came with charm, a voice that soothed fears, a face that inspired trust. He appeared in a time of great crisis, when nations were collapsing and people were begging for unity, and he gave it to them. At least, that's what they thought. He offered solutions that worked: economic recovery, peace treaties, a global healthcare system, clean energy, safer cities. His rise seemed almost miraculous. Even skeptics were won over. I saw crowds cheering, parliaments applauding, churches inviting him to speak. He quoted scripture, out of context, twisted just enough to sound right. He talked about love, about peace, about the need to eliminate divisive beliefs. And the world loved him for it. I saw leaders of every faith, Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and more, standing at his side, calling him the great unifier. He didn't deny God. He didn't demand worship, at least not at first. He simply positioned himself as the one who could finally bring harmony to the world. But Jesus revealed to me what lay behind the curtain. This man's power came from darkness. Not political maneuvering or military strength, but spiritual manipulation. He was not merely a man. He was a vessel, filled with the spirit of the enemy, empowered to deceive even the elect, if possible. His words were like honey, sweet, smooth, and deadly. People clung to him, followed him, trusted him more than they trusted their pastors, more than they trusted the word of God. And the moment they gave him their hearts, they surrendered their souls. Jesus said, "Many of my children will be deceived, not because they don't love me, but because they do not know me. They know religion, they know culture, but they do not know my voice." And I wept because I saw it happening. I saw congregations trading truth for relevance. I saw believers justifying compromise. I saw prayer replaced with policy and discernment drowned by distraction. And still, the Antichrist rose higher, feeding the world's hunger for peace, even as he led them into spiritual captivity. I saw him eventually demand more than applause. Slowly, subtly, he required allegiance. He said it was for the good of all, to eliminate extremism, to unify humanity, to ensure stability. And those who resisted? They were cast out, vilified, persecuted. But even then, Jesus reminded me, his power has limits, his time is short, and those who remain faithful will see through his lies. The enemy's strategy wasn't brute force. It was seduction, false promises, twisted truth. And it was working. But I also saw the fire in the eyes of the faithful, the ones who had counted the cost and chosen the cross. They were few, but they were unstoppable. Not because of who they were, but because of who lived within them. And in them, I saw the true church. Not a building, not a denomination, but a bride made ready for her king. And I knew, even in the midst of darkness, light still burns. The vision continued, and though what I had already seen was heavy beyond words, what came next stirred something deeper in me, something I can only describe as holy defiance. I was shown a remnant, a gathering of believers who had refused the mark, who had stood their ground even when it cost them everything. These weren't superstars. They weren't powerful or popular. Many had lost their jobs, their homes, their standing in society. Some were bruised, weary, hungry, but none were broken. Their eyes, oh their eyes, burned with a peace and clarity that no system could offer, no machine could measure. They met in hidden places, abandoned barns, darkened basements, old caves tucked away in the woods. They had no programs, no lights, no stage performances. They had each other, and they had Jesus. And that was enough. I saw one gathering where a group of them were worshipping quietly. No instruments, just whispered songs sung through trembling lips. Children huddled against their parents, some too young to fully understand what was happening, but their eyes shone with the trust passed down through faithful hearts. One man stood to read from a torn, weathered Bible. It had been smuggled, hidden, clung to like a lifeline. Every word felt sacred, not just read, but received like water in a desert. They didn't fear being caught. They feared missing the presence of God. And His presence was there, strong and undeniable. It wrapped around them like a blanket in the cold. It strengthened their backs, steadied their voices, and reminded them of who they were. And what stunned me most was how their faith began to spread. Quietly, like embers passed hand to hand. People who had taken the mark, some ignorantly, some in desperation, began to feel the emptiness of what they'd chosen. The promises they'd believed were beginning to unravel. The peace they had been sold turned out to be surveillance. The unity turned into uniformity. And in the silence of their souls, they heard a whisper, truth calling them back. I saw some of these people find their way to the believers. They came with tears, with guilt, with fear that they had gone too far. But the believers didn't turn them away. They didn't shame them. They embraced them. They prayed over them, wept with them, and helped them repent, even knowing it might cost them more. They knew the price of mercy, and they were willing to pay it. Jesus showed me that even in the darkest hour, there would still be redemption. The door of grace wouldn't close until the final moment, and though not all would return, some would. Moved by the courage and unwavering love of those who had refused to compromise, they would be drawn back to the truth, not by force, but by the witness of the faithful. I saw underground networks form, not digital, not coordinated by any leader, but guided by the Spirit. These groups shared what little they had: food, shelter, Bibles, words of hope. They didn't hoard. They gave. They didn't live for survival. They lived to shine. Jesus spoke to me again, and this time His voice trembled with love and fierce compassion. Tell them, Linda. Tell them I will never leave them. In the fire, in the wilderness, in the silence, I will be there. They may be abandoned by the world, but they will never be abandoned by me. Those words burned into my soul, because I saw what came next. I saw the final part of the vision, the culmination of the battle, the moment when everything changed. The heavens split open, and a light beyond comprehension poured forth. Not the soft light of morning. This was the glory of God, unveiled. It was like the sun had been invited into the spirit realm, and it was pulsing with holiness. The sky itself seemed to make way, folding back to reveal a king, not just in name, but in form. Jesus, no longer in the gentle radiance of before, but now revealed in full authority. Eyes like fire, robes of brilliance. His voice was thunder and music and stillness all at once. He wasn't coming to plead. He was coming to reign. Behind him were hosts, armies of angels, their presence fierce yet peaceful. They rode not with vengeance, but with justice. The darkness that had spread across the earth trembled. The false light of the Antichrist dimmed. His system began to crack. The pride of leaders who had stood against God melted into horror as the truth of who they had opposed became undeniable. I saw people fall to their knees, some in repentance, some in dread. The ones who had mocked, silenced, and hunted God's people now saw who truly held the power. And the believers, the faithful ones who had endured to the end, stood with faces lifted high. Not in pride, but in pure, unfiltered joy. Their faith had not been in vain. Their suffering had not been wasted. Their God had come. And as the dust settled, I saw a new earth, not rebuilt by human hands, but restored by divine promise. The sky was clearer, the ground vibrant. The air itself felt alive. There was no hunger, no death, no weeping. Just peace, the kind the world had always longed for, but never known until now. I saw homes filled with laughter, fields ripe with fruit, oceans glimmering with light, and in the center of it all, the presence of God, dwelling among his people. There were no churches, because every place was holy. There were no sermons, because the truth now lived with us. We had no more questions, only awe. Jesus looked at me one last time, his face soft again, filled with the same love I had first seen in that tunnel of light. "Linda," he said, "this is the victory I promised. It is certain. But my children must prepare, not in fear, but in faith. They must live for what is coming, not what is passing away." He showed me one more image. People living their daily lives on earth now, distracted, busy, scrolling on phones, arguing over meaningless things, chasing wealth, approval, pleasure. Oblivious to the battle raging around them. I wanted to cry out, to shake them awake, but Jesus simply said, "This is why you must speak." And then I returned, gasping, my body heavy again, the air thick, my heart pounding like it had just been rebuilt. But my soul had been marked by heaven. I knew I could never be the same. And now I tell this story not to frighten, but to prepare. The time is short. The warnings are real, but so is the hope. Jesus is coming again. And for those who hold fast to him, who refuse to bow to fear, who walk in truth even when the world offers them everything for a lie, they will see his glory. They will share in his victory, and they will live in the light forever.